Hey guys, it's Matt, welcome to SpeedTutor, and I was playing Stalker 2 recently, and I just thought to myself, do you know what, I'm going to create this interaction system for a tutorial, and I don't know if you feel it sometimes, but the motivation hits me and I want to create it, so here's a tutorial all about it. I hope you find it useful, that when you're in the proximity of objects, you see a little white dot appear. If you look away from it, even if you're in proximity, it disappears, and if you look at it, it will bring up some WorldSpace UI, which can then have interaction names and different things when you look around. So you can see in my Unity version here, I can see a bunch of objects on the floor there. Now, they're not in range, so you don't see any highlight. Now, if we walk up to them, you can see that the white dots appear on them. Now, if I look away and they're in the edge of my view, I'm not actually looking towards them. So they're away and I can't see those points. Only when I look back towards them will it do it. And then when we are close enough to them, as you can see, it will update the names and we can pick up these objects. And these are use scriptable objects. So be sure to throw a like on the video, comment if you've got any improvement suggestions, or just want to say thanks, and I will be putting up my Patreon too, along with over 225 other assets that you cannot find anywhere else. So stick around and let me know what you think. I will just mention that when I was doing this video, I didn't realise for some reason that all my UI stuff was over this walkie-talkie rather than the healing pills. So I will change that later in the video, but just pretend that I'm talking about the walkie-talkie. So to get us started with this, I've just got 3 different objects, some tape, a walkie-talkie, and some pills that we're going to be able to collect. And this could work with 1,000 different items in your game. I do already have a canvas, which is scaled with screen size of 1920 by 1080. And this just has an image on it, which is the dot in the middle of the screen, just so that we can tell what the center is. I've got a player character, which we're going to use, because we're going to use this as the raycast and the detection. And it has a tag of player. And as I say, I've got a bunch of objects. These could be cubes if you really want them. So to get started, we need to make sure that when we walk into any specific object that we have, we want to make the little circle appear. So let's take these healing pills as an example. We want to create a trigger event that when we walk into that will be in the range of the object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click that object, choose 3D object and choose sphere. Now you can see it's at the very center and I'm going to scale up the sphere, maybe this size. So when we walk into this, it's going to be something that we'll see. Now it's already got a sphere collider. We don't need the mesh collider on anymore. What I like to do is sometimes add a transparent material so I can see it in my scene if I need to visualize it. But it's got a sphere collider which we're going to interact with, and you need to make sure that this is set to isTrigger. We want a trigger script to be able to make this happen. So when we walk into it, we want things to start happening. I'm going to create a new C# script or mono behavior script and just call this trigger collider. In this script, I'm going to use onTriggerEnter and onTriggerExit. And then I'm going to make sure that if we interact with any collider which has the tag of player, we must have interacted with it, so then we're going to do things inside it. I'm just going to add those both to the exit trigger. And in here, what we want to be able to do is make sure that in the objects or the interactable objects that we'll find, we want to have some logic to suggest that the player is nearby. We want to show that WorldSpace UI, which was the dot that we wanted to create, and then add the object to the list that are actually nearby, so then we can use it to understand which things should be appeared at any time. We'll take these notes that we've just made. So if we exit that collider, the player is not nearby at this point. We want to hide the WorldSpace UI dot. We want to hide any prompts that might have appeared or anything like that, which is additional, and then remove any objects that might be nearby that we've got this script reference to. So with that created, we can add that to our sphere, which was the collider that we had, or the trigger. We can add the trigger collider, and we want to create some persistent data for each of our objects. So we're going to create a scriptable object to make this happen. Because with them being scriptable objects, it makes it easier to remember the data, and it's easier to get this to customize in the future. So if we go to scripting and we go to a scriptable object, and I'm just going to call this InteractableItemData. And you can see in this case, it's already in Unity 6 created this for us, but it's public class, the InteractableItemData as scriptableObject instead of the mono behavior. So within here, and it does give us a create menu where we can create this item. So I'm just going to have a public string, and it's going to be the item name, because we're going to be able to set this anytime that we want to do it. If the item name is healing pills or walkie-talkie, we can have that. Then we'll have another public string, which is going to be the interaction prompt, because we want to be able to maybe say F to pick up, something like that. And this is something we're going to update for each object. So I've created a little items folder, and you can right click, choose create, choose scriptable object. You can choose the interactable item data. And with that being said, I'm just going to name this healing pills as an example. Then I'll set the name as medical pills, and then I might just have F to pick up, just as something like this. Of course, you can extend this in any way you like in the future, but this is just one example to make this work. Now, you remember in the trigger event that we needed to make sure that we notified when the player's nearby, or when we got to update the dot and things like that. So we're going to create a new script which goes on every single one of our interactive items that could be different for every item that we've got. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to create a new script, and I'm just going to name this InteractableObject. And this is going to go on each of our objects, and this will reference some of the ScriptableObject data that we want to use. So to begin with, what we're going to need is a reference to that interactable item data, and that's going to be the item data that we'll get for the object itself. So we can update the UI, the name, and other things like that. What we also want is a bunch of canvases and texts. And you need to make sure that you say using TM-Pro, because we need to use TextMesh Pro for this. So the canvas is the white dot canvas that you want to appear. The prompt canvas is the thing that will have the name and the action on it, because the white dot will appear when you look or in range of an object, and the prompt appears only when you're actually specifically highlighting or hovering over that object. What I also like to create is a private is the player nearby. And with that being said, I'm just going to create a public property so this can be accessed outside of this script, and I can just write that by saying public bool uppercase is player nearby equals greater than, and the actual lowercase is player nearby. So we can use this in a little bit. I want to go back to Unity and now start by creating the UI elements that we need. So what I'm going to do is right click my healing pills. I'm going to choose UI, and I'm going to choose canvas. This is going to be on this object. By default, a canvas is not a WorldSpace UI. I'm going to change that to WorldSpace so that we can start using it. Now, the best thing to do is make sure that your WorldSpace UI now is set to 0.01 on the width and 0.01 on the height. And then from there, you can right click that canvas, choose UI, and then what I'm going to do is also choose an image again. And this image is just going to be the knob object for our just like our crosshair was. And it is good to scale down the object, because this will be still quite big compared to our scene. So you can see our scene down there, and this is quite big. So I'm going to set this to 0.1 and 0.1. Keep everything set to default, and we can go back to the canvas, and I'm going to drag this all the way down to the bottom where I'd expect it in our scene. And you can see it here, it looks a little bit stretched. So on our canvas, make sure that the scale is set to 1 on the X and 1 on the Y. Make sure that your WorldSpace.image is 0.1 on the width and 0.1 on the height, because I just made a mistake. Then back on the canvas, make sure that X and Y is set to 1, because you can adjust these if you want to scale it down slightly. But I think this size is perfectly fine. But the one thing to remember is that your canvas should be 0.01 in width and height, because that gives us the best scaling possible. You'll be able to see that dot in our game view, just like that. Now remember, when we rotate the canvas, it should follow the player around, so we're always looking at it, because remember, this is only a 2D image. So the best thing to do is create yourself a little script, and we're going to call this LookAtCamera. So this object, no matter where we go, will always be looking at the player. So what I've done here in this script is I've got a private transform for the camera. So wherever the camera is, we want to assign the player's position or the camera position. I did create 3 offsets, which are just floats. If you need to offset or change the angle of what it will appear, but sometimes with world spaces, it can be in a weird direction. So you can use transform.lookat, and the object will look at the camera. And sometimes you need to do the offset to rotate it. So sometimes you need to set the Y offset to about 180 to make this look realistic. So a good thing you can do now is go to your .canvas and make sure that you add the LookAtCamera script. And as you can see, the script is looking for the main camera. So if we just drag it in, we've got the main camera's transform there. Now you can see our dot, which no matter where we position ourselves, it will always look like it's looking at us. Now do remember that we also wanted some text to appear by this, so then we can use it. So what I like to do is I'm going to duplicate the dot canvas, and I'm just going to call this the text canvas. And because we're already using this, I want to make sure that the width and height are 0.01 and 0.01 again. The scale is the same, 1 and 1. And then under here, we don't need the InteractionDot anymore. So we can right click that text canvas, choose UI again, and then I'm just going to choose text with Text Mesh Pro. And you can see this Text Mesh Pro text is really, really massive. So what I like to do is scale this down. So I'm going to set this to about 0.2, but it still has a massive bounding box. So I'm going to set the width to about 1.6 and then the height to 1. So it all fits in this bounding box really close to our object here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to centralize the alignment of this text. So I'm going to set this default text to F to pick up, and you can see it like that. So I'm going to rename this text just to our interaction text, and I'm just going to duplicate that and call this our item name text, because this is the thing that's going to appear when we choose to select what item will be. So I'll select the move tool, and I'm just going to put this next to it here. I'm going to set the item to medical pills, something like that. I'll make sure the alignment is not on the middle anymore and it's on the right hand side. Then if I update the name, it will never encroach on the other items that we have on the opposite side. So again, we've got the LookAtCamera on that text canvas. I like to grab the canvas and place this roughly in the middle of our object where we expect it to be. Now, when you press play, you can see that the object is slightly inverted. So what we need to do there is go back to our rotation offset and set the Y to 180 degrees. And then you can see that it will rotate around exactly the right way that we need it to be. So what I'm going to do is disable those two elements, and I'm going to go onto my healing pills as the example and add the interactable object script that we'd already created. You can see it's looking for some item data. So if we go into the items, we'll add the healing pills scriptable object. You can see that it's looking for the white dot canvas that we wanted. So we've already created that. It's looking for the prompt canvas, which was the text canvas. And it was also looking for interaction text, which was the action, and then the item name text. So we can update those based on the scriptable object data that we've given. And what I like to do at the start is make sure that the canvases are disabled or set. So we've got a helper method which will just set the state, because we might need to do this several times. So I'm just going to create a method called setCanvasState, and I've just referenced the variables and I've just added a false. I can have a private setCanvasState, have that as canvas, and I'm just going to have that lowercase, comma, bool, and it's going to be the state that it is at any time. And then we'll just make sure that the canvas isn't equal to null, and the canvas.gameobject.activeSelf is not equal to the current state. Then we should be able to make sure that we set it. Then we'll say canvas.gameobject.setActive is the same as the state. So every time we do it, we're going to set each of those canvases to false, and we're going to use this throughout the script. Remember, in our trigger script, we wanted to make sure that we tell when the player's nearby, or to be able to show the dot where we need it. So in the interactable object script, we want a new public method in here, which is called public void show white dot that we wanted to use. And then we'll say that if the player is nearby, then we'll do that helper method, the set canvas state, the white dot canvas, comma true, so that we can set it to true when we need it. We'll also have another public method, which is hide the white dot, and this is just when we exit that trigger, we can just set that to false. So we also wanted the method to set whether the player's nearby or not. So we'll have public void set player nearby, have that as bool as is nearby in this case. And then we'll say that is player nearby equals nearby for this object. Then we'll say that if is nearby is false at any point, then we want to hide that white dot. And we also want to hide the prompt if we'd made that applicable yet, but we've not done that just yet. We can go back to our trigger, and then because we wanted to show that UI, that dot, we'll say that we want to reference our interactable object that's going to be the one on the actual objects that we use. So we'll have a private reference to that interactable object and just call that lowercase interactable object. So in my case now, we can reference that new field and say that dot show white dot. So that's going to be that method in the script, which is going to be show that dot if the player is nearby. We also want to make sure that the player is nearby. We also want to make sure that we update that field to say that player is nearby. So interactiveObject.set player nearby is true. So then what we could do is copy these lines here and paste them in our exit method. And then in this case, we want to be false. And then this one, we want to say hide the white dot. So now if we go back to our game scene, and you can see that the sphere collider that had the trigger event, we want the interactive object. So we can just put the healing pills because that's part of the same thing. You can see the healing pills has everything attached. Now if we hit play, nothing's appeared. And only when we walk into the trigger do we actually see that white dot appear that will appear on our screen. Obviously nothing happens left or right, up or down, because it's only the interaction when we've walked into that trigger. This could be enough for you, and you don't need the extra logic to be able to look around. So this could work, and that would make it appear. And of course we need some logic that when we look at the object, we can make the pop out appear there. So that's all well and good, but to be able to make sure that we have detection working properly and we work out all the objects that are in our area, we need to make sure that we're going to write a new script which is going to go on our player to do raycasts and do other detection. So I'm going to create a new mono behavior script and just call this player interaction. What I will do to start with, I'll select my FPS controller and add the player interaction script. And then I will open that up in Visual Studio. What I like to do is write a public transform to the camera transform because we're going to need to use that. We're going to need a new private method to the max interaction distance that we're going to be able to interact with objects for. So I'll set that equal to 5, just as this example, and make sure that that is a float. Then again, we're going to have another private float for the general direction angle, set that equal to 0.5. I like to add a section for a layer mask, so then we can say that which objects should be excluded from this interaction. I'll set that to a name of interactable layer. What I'm going to also do is create a list so we can store exactly which objects are in front of the camera. So I'm going to say list, and in angle brackets, we're going to say that the interactable object, and then I'm just going to call this the nearby objects, set that equal to new list, angled brackets, and the interactable object again, and then end that out there. And it will squiggle it because it needs to be able to access using system.collections.generic to be able to access the list, because it find it better than arrays. And then I'm also going to have a private reference to the interactable object, which is just going to be the current target that we're looking at any point. And then I'm just going to have a public static instance to this object so that we can make sure that we can reference this script, because there'll only be ever one of these scripts from other places where we need to. In the awake method, we can say this instance equals this, so there's only going to be one of these at any time. I'm going to have a public void in here to add the nearby objects anytime that we come in contact with them. And we'll add a parameter called InteractableObject and just call that object for shorthand. So then we're going to say that if !nearby objects doesn't contain the current objects, then we're going to add to that list. We're going to add to the nearby objects dot add the new object that we found. Additionally, with that, if we're going to add objects, we need to remove them. So we'll check if nearby objects does contain a current object, we can then remove that. And then if we say that the current target that we've got is ever equal to the object in question, then we can clear the current target, but we need to create that method. Then we can create a method called clear current target and set it equal. If it's not equal to null, then we're going to hide the prompt at any point and set the current target to null. So we can, or we're not using it at any point. We will update this as we go along. So what I like to do now is you create an update method, because we're going to handle the interaction and then the direction that we need to update. So that in this case, we need to update the white dots when we come into contact or when we're not looking in its direction. So that can be something that we need to do. We need to also handle which is the thing that we're looking at any one time. So we'll call that handle best candidate. In this update method, what I'm also going to do, if I press F and the current target, when we do have something on our current target, we're going to pick it up. And if we do that, the current target should then be equal nothing, because we're not looking at anything at that point. So we wanted to update the dots based on the direction that we're looking at. So I'm going to create another method called the update white dots and write a for each loop. So we'll open that up and say var object in nearby objects, and then we'll say vector3 direction to object equals object dot lowercase transform dot position minus the camera transform that we already created. Dot position, and then we'll say float dot, because we're going to work out based on vector3 dot, which is a product between two vectors that we're going to compare. And we'll say that camera transform dot forward, comma, the direction to the object dot normalized, and then end that up. So what this does is calculate the direction to the object. So we'll take the object's current position and the camera's position, and then we'll also compare those two based on the camera's forward position and the position that we've just calculated. And now we can use this, that if dot is greater than the general direction angle, we can then show the white dots by saying object show white dot, or if not, and it's outside of our range, we'll say object dot hide white dot. So now we've written this object to update the white dots. Make sure that in our update method, we have exposed the update white dots so that we're always checking to do this when we're going to be in the direction that we want. So now back in our trigger collider, you can see that we can now add objects that are going to be near. So what we can do is, because we made the instance of the player interaction, we'll say player interaction dot instance dot add nearby object, and it's going to be the interactable object. And then below we'll copy that line, then we'll say player action dot instance, and then we'll say remove nearby objects because they're out of the particular range. Need to make sure that on the FPS controller we add the main camera. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this unfocused, and I've set the general direction to about 0.9 because I feel as if that's most accurate. You can set this between 0 and 1 to see which works for you. Now do watch that list on the right, which is nearby objects. When I get close, you can see that when I'm close, healing pills has appeared. And you can see the dot on that object. Now, if I walk away, you can see it's removed from that list. So it's not interactable, or it's not needing to appear dots anymore. Now, you can see the object there. Now, if I look down, you could see that the dot disappears. If I look all the way up, it disappears just right at the end. And if I look left and right, I'm not really focusing on that dot anymore. So it disappears until I'm in the proximity. And as I say, you can adjust that 0.9 value to make this stronger or less depending on how close you want to look at it. So with the dots working, you can use this for your own game or your own scene just as it is, and I'm going to create it so it incorporates both the dots and the prompts that we're going to want to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove what I had, and in my update method I'm just going to call this a method called update interactions, and then what I'm going to do from there is change my update white dots method to something else. So we'll keep that for each loop here, and we'll still use the same logic, which is for the nearby objects. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to leave the if dot is greater than the general angle, and I'm going to remove the else statement and then remove the item inside there. So now in this case, what we can do, we're going to create a local variable called is looking directly, because we're going to determine whether we're actually looking directly at an object or not. We're going to set this equal to is looking directly at, and then open up the brackets. We'll just say the object, because this is something that we've been finding throughout. Now this is going to activate a method that we want to do, which is going to be a raycast method, which is just going to be the same thing, is looking directly at. So we'll say private bool is looking directly at, open brackets, interactableObject object, and then we're going to perform a raycast in here, and then it's going to pass the same data back to where we need it to be. So we'll say that ray with a lowercase equals new, ray, open up a bracket and say camera transform dot position, comma, camera transform dot forward, and then we'll say that under here, if physics dot raycast, open that up, ray, comma, out raycast hit, comma, the max interaction distance, comma, the interactable layer that we wanted to use, and we'll close that up with two brackets on the end. And below here, then we'll say that we're going to return the hit.collider.gameObject and set that equal to the object.gameObject. And then in any other case, we can return false here, because we're saying that if the raycast hits the object, we'll find the object that's appropriate, and we'll pass that back to here to say that we know that we're looking directly. If not, we're just going to return false, and this boolean is going to be false, and we're not looking at anything in that case. So then under here, if we're looking directly at something, we'll say that if is looking directly is true at that point, we'll say that we need to handle the prompts that we're going to show that if current target is not equal to the object, then the current target (hide prompt), but we need to create this method, and then we'll say current target is equal to the object, and then we'll say that the current target dot show prompt is something that we need to show. And then under here, we'll say that object dot hide white dot is something that we need to hide when it's visible. And then we'll need to say that we found a target. If we go back to the top of our script here of the update interactions, we're just going to have a local variable called found target. And back down here under here, we'll just say found target equals true. Then what we can say under here, we'll just write an else statement and then say that object dot show white dot. This will be showing the white dot if we're not directly looking at something. And then under here, we'll write another else statement and say that object dot hide white dot, and because that with a white dot if the object is not looking at all in the general direction. And under the last section here, underneath the for each loop, we'll say that if the found target is not true, we're just going to clear the current target at any point. So in the clear target, we need to make sure that clear target.hide prompt. Now we're going back into the InteractableObject script, and we're going to create those things that we want to be able to hide and show the prompts based on the object. Underneath the hide white dot method, just to keep it nice and neat, we'll say public void show prompt, and we'll say hide white dot, and then we'll say set canvas state, and prompt canvas is true. Then we're going to update any of the item text that we need. So we'll say item name text.text is equal to item data.item name, and then action text.text is equal to item data.interaction prompt. And in the hide prompt, we want to set the canvas state to the canvas to false, and if the player is nearby, again, we need to make sure that we show the white dots. So I did change this at this point in the tutorial to actually make sure that this is the walkie-talkie that we were doing this for. But anyway, at this point, because we've written all the script now, that we make sure that the walkie-talkie game object has a collider on it too. So I'm just going to add a smaller sphere collider over this because we're going to have an interaction, and make sure it's got a layer of collectible. And if not, you can add a new layer and make sure you give it a name and apply that to your object that you've got. Make sure on your FPS controller and on your player interaction script in the inspector, make sure you set interactable layer as collectible. Now when we play our scene and we get towards this object, we can still look between where the white dot will disappear, but when we look at the object, you can see now that you can see the UI update, when we look at it and you look away and the dot will reappear. Or to do a type of pickup interaction, you can see here that we've got the update method, which is current target.pickup. Now we can reveal that, and you'll notice that the current target doesn't have any method that it can reference or do anything with. So what we can do is go back to the object interaction, and I like to add this to the top. We'll say public void pickup, and then we'll say that the player interaction.instance will remove the nearby object, and we'll just say this because we're making sure that it's gone from what we can select. We're going to make sure that we clear any UI before its destruction, just so that it's not left and looking weird. So we'll say we'll hide the white dots, and we'll also hide any prompts that might also be there just to make sure. And then you can either hide or destroy this game object just so that you can't see it anymore. So again, in your player interaction script, when you press F and you have a target, you'll run that target's pickup method. We go up to this, and if you hit F, you can see that it disappeared. As you can see in the object interaction script, you could add additional functionality to the pickup because you've got a scriptable object here, so you could add this to an inventory and add any data you need to that. And let's say we want to transfer this to other objects that might want to do the similar thing. So as you can see, I do have the tape and the pills that we might want to add this data to. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy those 3 items that were specific to the walkie-talkie object. I'll just duplicate them and add them to the tape, and duplicate them and add them to the pills. And what I'm going to do is add the sphere collider over there. You can see by I'm just moving the gizmo roughly over the top of it. You can see the canvas. I'm just going to move the two canvases roughly by the object and do the same over the tape here. Now we need to make sure on the tape object, again, just like with a walkie-talkie, it's got an interactable object script. It's going to reference the different things that we need. So we need the white canvas, the prompt canvas, and then the two interaction action text and the item text. And it's looking for some data. So what we can do is duplicate two more of those scriptable objects down in the project file and just call this tape. And what we'll do is we'll update the name of tape in its scriptable object, and then we'll also rename the medical pills and set the item name to that too in the scriptable object. So the tape is looking for the tape scriptable object. The sphere collider will be looking for the interactable object, so make sure you add the tape because it's relevant to itself. And similarly with the pills, make sure it's got an interactable object script. Make sure that you add the medical pills item data and then add the same UI. Now that's done, make sure you select on the trigger object for the pills and add the pills object. Make sure the pills and tape both have a sphere collider attached, and they both have a collectible layer just to make sure that they're fully interactable. And as long as that's set up correctly, all of these items appear with the dots over them. We can look away and they disappear as we expect, like so. We can look at any of them and you can see the interaction over the top and how they appear to be able to collect them and to be able to show the text over the top. And now they're gone and ready to be used and taken around with you in whatever system you choose to use it with. And again, you can make these into prefabs and use them a million different times. And of course, comment down below if you've got any suggestions how to make this better. I will add this to my Patreon with the script and the project so you can get hold of it. Do check out the rest of the amazing stuff on my Patreon too, because there's over 225 different scripts, assets and projects you cannot find anywhere else. And also, be sure to check out the last bit of Unity sale and the amazing Humble Bundle with loads of collection of assets on there too. Big thank you to all my patrons. Massive thank you to Peter Steiner, Verishutha, Jennifer and David for amazing support. And thank you to everybody else who comes to watch the video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Cheers.